Okay, what's coming through the mirror, or showing up on the mirror, I guess? A set of enormous eyes loomed over him. Not a pair, a full set. The middle ones, the largest, with dark pupils, were distorted into huge rings. Around them floated several additional smaller eyes, silvery with dark rims, all different sizes. Tufts of silver radiated from the apparition. Gah! He jumped back involuntarily, tipping the entire desk stool over. Somehow he managed to stay upright instead of landing flat on his back, but it involved a great deal of undignified scrambling. Wah! Exclaimed the apparition, rearing backwards. Arms appeared at the bottom, waving frantically. The arms gave him a reference point, and the backward lunge brought the image into better focus. Not a monster, a man, wearing a bizarre array of lenses on his face. The lenses in front of his eyes explained why they had been so distorted as he leaned in towards the mirror. The others had no explanation Gav could think of. Oh! Zaxis blinked at him, each eyelash magnified 100 times. I forgot my lenticulars again, didn't I? Oh, good. So this would be a regular occurrence. Yes, he replied, trying to mask his still racing heart with a tone of bored irritation. You did. Zaxis continued to blink at him. Do you want to take them off? They are rather distracting. Oh, right, the other wizard said. Gav couldn't remember where the accent came from, warm and rounded and musical. Zaxis fiddled with something behind his head, and the entire array popped off into his hand, so Gav could actually see his face. Zaxis' skin was not far off from the mayor's, a deep brown. Perhaps the Tyrwins had once hailed from a similar place. The much older man's white hair had a texture that allowed it to stand straight up on its own, in spikes around his face. Judging by the numerous stains and holes and burns adorning Zaxis' robes, Gav guessed that his colleague's hair represented less a local style and more just the wildness of neglect. So, Zaxis leaned back. What was it we were going to talk about? You called me, Gav said slowly. Oh, right. So I did. Zaxis drummed his fingers. Have I showed you my latest creation? Whether he had or not, it seemed safer to answer no. Also, any hint at all as to what kind of person he was dealing with might be helpful. Gav shook his head, bemused. I have it right here somewhere. Hold on. Zaxis leaned away from the mirror, allowing Gav to see more of the other wizard's workshop. It was vast. Hard to make out, but it seemed to be the inside of some sort of cave or crater. Flowering vines spilled down from an overhang not far behind Zaxis, but through them he could see an area open to sunlight before a crater wall arose once more. Close to the mirror, however, was a workshop that put Gav's little tower room to shame. Bubbling glassware, gleaming brass instruments, strange creatures in a multitude of cages. A tiny lizard scuttled over a workbench and ventured too near a cage, and a clawed foot reached out from underneath a rock habitat in the cage and slammed down on the helpless lizard, dragging it into the shadow, still twitching. Ah, here it is. Zaxis returned, bearing a smaller cage. He reached inside and pulled out a tiny monstrosity. Gav didn't recognize the animal the creature started out as. Something small and furry? But he was willing to bet it had not begun life with either the rainbow-colored wings or the serpent tail. I started with the wings, Zaxis chatted happily, but since it was the first one to survive this particular bone grafting process, I just kept going. I was considering fish gills next. Wouldn't that interfere with the purpose of the wings? Gav said, balancing between being sickened and fascinating. Well, it can't fly anyway without additional spells. Mammal bones are much too heavy. Zaxis waved his hand. But I suppose it would ruin the aesthetic effect. I wonder, would the local girls like them? The wings? Gav thought about how Alicia would likely respond to being handed a rat with pigeon wings. I'm not sure they would appreciate their pets having an extra set of limbs, no. No, not the pets. They're girls. It would be rather pretty. Don't you think? Although a bit difficult finding wings of a suitable size. No, Alicia would not like that one bit. Perhaps you might ask them instead of me, he settled on. From across the room he could feel her eyes burning into his back. Yes, he was well aware of the hypocrisy. But surely turning a count into a chicken made a kinder solution than setting him on fire. Oh, Zaxus tapped his teeth. The other wizard seemed incapable of sitting still for longer than a second or two. It seems like such a bother, either to add them and then let them get used to the idea. Oh, yes, I remember why I called. And why is that? What had Gavarax made of this one, he wondered. Jealousy? Zaxus boasted a far more impressive laboratory, and honestly seemed rather more brilliant, but also quite mad. Valvina, she said you were different somehow the last time she talked. Ice ran down his spine, his guts cramped. Of course, he had been naive to think she wouldn't have noticed. He tried to keep his voice calm. Different how? Something about not appreciating her assets in your usual fashion. I can't say I feel the same, as you've been perfectly willing to examine my latest research. He stopped short. A crafty look came over his face. Actually more willing than usual. I say, are you trying to butter me up in advance of the meeting? Meeting? A meeting? What meeting? The last thing he wanted was a meeting. The convocation, the great shindig, the culmination of Xanaconar's master plan. Oh, that meeting, he said weakly. I've been a bit distracted lately. You know how it is. When is it again? It sounded unbelievable to his own ears, but Zaxus nodded sympathetically. The old mad wizard probably forgot his own name on a daily basis. Too bad they couldn't swap. Cheer up, lad. You've got a whole week. A week? I have to say, it was rather surprised you volunteered to host, Zaxus continued. His eyes narrowed. Then again, I don't suppose Xanaconar gave you much choice, did he? You know Xanaconar, Gav said, mostly to keep from showing his sudden terror. A week. The three of them were descending on his castle to fulfill this evil plan that he still couldn't remember. In just a week? Unfortunately, said Zaxus. At least Gav wasn't the only one scared of him, it seemed. But the other wizard brightened. Still, it will all pay off in the end, won't it? I hope so, Gav said. Why, Teritherax would want dragon tears is beyond me, but I suppose that's rather the point. They are beyond us. Zaxus nattered on, but I got them, sure enough, and it didn't take nearly as many meerkats as I brought with me. And once we'd bound him, well, then I suppose we'll have all the wings I want without any of those heroes bouncing around and getting in the way. Teritherax again. He shuddered, thinking of that flash of wings and hot breath on the back of his neck, and renewed his resolution not to say the name aloud. Dragon tears. More clues that probably would have been useful if he had any context for them at all. But then if he had the context, he wouldn't need the clues. It sounded like they were attempting an even stronger summoning and binding ritual. He had grave reservations about that after his last experience. Oh, who's that? Come into the frame, girl. Let's see you, said Zaxus. Why not? This could hardly get any worse. Gav twisted around. Alicia stood with wide eyes, rather less glamorous without her glamour, having edged just a little too far. He reluctantly motioned her to join him, less suspicious than trying to hide her now. This is my new apprentice, said Gav. Oh, apprentices. I love apprentices. So bright and shiny, said Zaxus. Then he looked a little crestfallen. I never seem to last. Alicia's eyes flicked over to Gav. Rather on the plain side, isn't she? Zaxus said as he peered closer. Have you considered prettying her up a bit? He expected her to bristle, but she just gave a little sigh, which somehow was worse. I like her just fine the way she is, he said firmly. Oh, I see, Xaxis cackled. What? No, you don't see, Gav said frantically. Alicia's ears were turning a shade of red normally found in roses and poppies, not human ears. No, I understand, Xaxis laughed, waving him off. No accounting for taste, I suppose. Enjoy your apprentice. I suppose that's why Valvalina was all fussy if you're too distracted with your toy to pay enough attention to her. Although, if you change your mind about upgrades, I'd be happy to help there. I've got some most lovely ideas about what could be done with the tibia. I'll see you in about a week. I'll see you in a week, not about. The mirror flickered out. For a minute or two, Gav and Alicia and Garabeetle sat in silence, alone with their thoughts. 1 week. 1 week to figure out how to hide the fact that he had lost his memory and clearly wasn't getting it back. 1 week to figure out what the plan he had committed himself to consisted of. 1 week to decide whether the really quite charming young princess in his care was worth standing up to 3 more powerful and potentially very angry wizards. And if she was, to figure out how to even let her go without causing her excruciating pain. Come to think of it, there was something else happening around that same time, wasn't there? Yes, King Baribano's promised heroes. Maybe he could just step back and let the heroes rescue the princess and fight off the wizards. Oh, how could he forget? Also the Garlic Festival. Perfect. A welcoming party. He choked back a hysterical laugh. If he wrote everyone concerned very nice letters, perhaps he can convince them to cancel? Or at least reschedule to a more congenial order? He'd get rid of the Garlic Festival at least. There was no point, since he didn't really see how the town would survive into the next month, let alone the winter. If he felt particularly benevolent and enterprising, he could have them all evacuate now. At least then he wouldn't have their additional deaths on his conscience. Then he could go with them. Leave an empty tower with a princess at the top. A princess and a bedraggled rooster. Let the heroes and the dark wizards fight over it. Hopefully the victor would be too busy to track him down. Tempting thought, except the part where Alicia stayed trapped. Besides, even if one of the 3 wizards survived, they'd want to know why he left them in ambush, and he did not have much confidence in his own ability to hide from them. All 3 seemed more accomplished than he was, even before the accident, and now it just put off the inevitable painful death. And he still didn't really want to die. You had no idea who he was, did you? He jerked away from her so hard he nearly fell over. What do you mean? Xaxis is one of my oldest friends. Friends? He considered what it would say about him that he was friends with someone planning to sew wings onto unconsenting women. Well, that might be overstating it a bit. There is something wrong with you. Alicia narrowed her eyes. You're very new to the way of wizards, he started. That's not what I meant. I never pretended to be anything other than a dark wizard, he said. You're not what I would expect a dark wizard to be, she continued. And how many dark wizards have you met? He was rapidly losing control of this conversation and had no idea what to do about it. She cocked her head and took a step forward. To his shame, he skittered backwards. None of your actions line up with the first night that I was here, she said. There's no reason why you would kidnap me and then try to make me into an ally. I thought at first it was a trap, but it's not, is it? You have no idea what you're doing. Fear and rage warred. Part of him wanted to strike out at her to prove that he was competent at that, at least to stop her from talking. His hands clenched. It wouldn't take that much. A knowledge demon, you said, she mused. Her breath caught in his breath caught in his throat. How much did it take? The floor dropped out from under him, and he was falling. He put a hand out, looking for a chair that wasn't there because they'd tidied it away, him and Alicia and Garabeetle. Because why not include Garabeetle in this disaster? And they were above him. He was shrinking into nothingness, the nothingness that he deserved. Well, no, he was just sitting on the floor. They were looking down at him, Garabeetle in confusion, and Alicia with a faint pity that was somehow even worse than contempt. "It's true, isn't it?" she said with just a touch of wonder. She hadn't been sure, he realized. She had tossed it out to see if it would land. He could have bluffed his way out if he'd kept his nerve. That made it even worse. He could deny it, but his knees had betrayed him, and there didn't seem much point. He nodded mutely. "How long?" she asked. He continued to stare at her mutely, trying to figure out how to answer and what to say. Words bubbled just under the surface, but nothing could break through. She tried again. "How much of your memory is gone?" "All of it," he said bleakly. That startled her. Wonderful. He was even worse off than she had thought. Well, he told himself, he enjoyed surprising her. He wanted to laugh, hysteria bubbling up. Why had he thought that she could help him? That she would help him? He was useless, unworthy of help. "What do you mean, all of it?" she said cautiously. He shrugged. "Why hide now?" "Everything, from the beginning. I don't even remember my name." "Dreadlord Garavax," supplied Garabeetle helpfully. He gave the goblin a withering stare that caused him to immediately shrink back into himself. "Who names their son Garavax?" "Someone who hates their child? Maybe that's why you turned evil," muttered the princess. She sniffed when he didn't respond and tried to get them back on topic. "You remember things minute to minute. You remembered something. What is the first thing you remember?" "Waking up with no eyebrows," he said, "and then visiting you. Is that when you first suspected that I wasn't enough like Garavax?" "What do you mean you weren't like Garavax?" she asked, baffled. "Wait, do you think you're someone else swapped into his body?" He hadn't even considered that one. But no, Estergath had known perfectly well who he was, and who would know better than a knowledge demon. "That is what I call him," he mumbled, the old me. She paused for a moment, then she asked more gently, the way a person might ask a crazy person so as not to set them off. "So what do you call yourself, then?" He blushed again. Of course he sounded like a crazy person. "I'm just Gavarax seemed like it didn't fit." He looked up. "You didn't answer the question. When did you start to suspect?" She sat back and blew out a breath and studied him. "You're surprised constantly by things that you ought to know. You fumble your way through talking to people you're clearly supposed to be familiar with. You don't recognize your own belongings, but you know what to do with them as soon as you see them. Your staff is constantly surprised too, like you never do what they expect you to do." She bit her lip. I thought it was from the knowledge demon, that it had done something to you before you ran into me in the hall. But you were saying it was earlier than that." He felt deflated, empty. He thought he was doing so well. He wondered how many other people had seen right through him. "It was the knowledge demon," he said dully. "You came in for round 2. "You did this to yourself?" Alicia looked amused. It burned, but not enough to snap him out of his fugue. "I don't know, maybe. So, if you want my help, you can start by letting me go." He closed his eyes. "You have no idea how to let me go, do you?" "Not so much, no." "You are an idiot." That was enough. "Yes, I am an idiot," he snapped, "but I do still remember my magic, which at least gives me more of a defense against Zarakonar and his friends than you have, so I wouldn't look so superior if I were you. I need help, yes, but you need help even more. So are you going to sit there and look down on me, or are we both going to make some kind of alliance to get us both out of this mess?" This mess that you started, Alicia pointed out. This mess that Garavax started, he corrected. You really think of him as a separate person, don't you? She said, still studying him. He had enough sitting below her. He picked himself up awkwardly, dusting himself off. It didn't do much, but it made him feel better. He might as well be. It felt so good to finally say it out loud, what had been creeping over him since he started to disapprove of his old self's choices. I don't know what he was thinking with any of this, and I can't honestly say I approve of his choices. Choices. That's what he had been missing. He suddenly realized if Garavax was a totally different person, this wasn't about changing who he was. It was about making different choices altogether. Huh. She looked thoughtful. So you don't know why you captured me in the first place? I have some guesses. None of them are good, he admitted, but he could choose to tell her. I think you're... Well, there's no good way to put this. I think you're a spell component. Zarakonar is summoning something big. Teratherax, she guessed. He felt that brush of attention again and realized he'd half flattened himself down. Don't say the name. Who is he? I don't know, but I know I don't want his attention. Anyway, each of us had assignment, something to gather, and I guess you are mine. And what happens to me in this spell? She held her head high. Her voice didn't quaver, but her hands were clasped together so tightly the knuckles turned white. I don't know, he said. I don't know what happens in the ritual itself. But it's probably not good. He shook his head. Probably not. And the virgin thing? She wouldn't look at him. He knew what she was asking, and he wasn't sure if any of the information his memory helpfully coughed up was actually better. I'm really not certain, but these things apparently tend to be more of an ingredient sort of thing than an action sort of thing. You know what I mean? Then why? He shrugged. I don't know if anyone knows. Maybe they taste better? He trailed off. There really wasn't anywhere good to go with that. I suppose the apprentice thing was just a test then. She sounded like she was struggling with both fear and bitterness. Actually, no, he said, glad to have one thing to give her. You really do show signs of talent. Valvalina's quite an accomplished sorceress. There's no reason you might not be some day as well, although I suspect you'll make some rather different sartorial choices. She just looked confused, and he remembered that she hadn't seen Valvalina in all her glory yet. Apparently, that would be coming shortly. But I really did mean it. I need help, and I think you should learn magic. I see. She swallowed, looking for all the world like she'd been hit by one of the goblins with a poleaxe. Do you need to sit down? He asked, knowing the feeling. Yes, please, she said, her knees folding abruptly. Fortunately, she landed on a carved chair. A particular expression crossed her face. Spit it out, he said, too tired to be anything but blunt. We've had enough secrets for one day. This chair is shockingly uncomfortable, she said, her face still unreadable. Ah, yes, he said sadly. Lesson 1 of wizardry. The props that make the people take you seriously are rarely comfortable. She looked up, startled. What are your thoughts on the torches? He asked quickly, before she had time to think. They're stupid. Her mouth snapped shut. She clearly regretted the statement. So they are, he smiled encouragingly, but threatening nonetheless. She looked around the room slowly. He could see her turning it over in her mind, trying to reevaluate everything she'd seen so far. What was true? What was just for impressiveness' sake? If she figured it out, he hoped that she'd share it with him. It's like my ring, isn't it? She said. If people don't see what they expect to see. Yeah, they're disappointed and they won't take you seriously. Gearbeetle raised a claw tentatively. Yes, Gearbeetle, he said gently, hoping the goblin would get out a full sentence without embarrassing himself in front of Alicia. He wasn't sure why it was important to him that she think well of the lad, but it was. What about goblins? Alicia started to protest immediately and then paused. The door blew open. I need to check and see because it's been a while of reading. Let me see how much longer this is going to go. I think I'm going to do a break there and we'll come back and find out why the door blew open.